Hello all and welcome back to the channel. This video will be part 2 of the Star Wars Canon Timeline, Reign of the Galactic Empire. It's going to span the years 15 BBY all the way up to 0 BBY, where Rogue One is. This is the key, just a refresher, the BBY, ABY timeline. Films, shows, and video games are represented with logos, short stories are dark green, comics red, novels are purple, digital events are light blue. And we're just going to fast forward through the timeline. We covered this last video. If you haven't seen that, definitely check that one out. Now feast your eyes onto this chaotic slide with all of the stuff happening between the years 15 and 0 BBY. We will start with Lords of the Sith. It's a novel written by Paul S. Kemp. It was one of the first books to come out in the canon back in 2014. It is a great story, with Vader and Palpatine stranded on the planet Ryloth. Cham Syndulla, Hera Syndulla from Rebels, her father, is also in this book. Tarkin, written by James Luceno, is a story about Tarkin working his way up through the Imperial ranks, and I haven't read it in quite a bit. I know a lot of people love it. There are some really cool scenes. Vader is in there, some parts, and definitely if you're a Tarkin fan, it's really the only thing he has in canon, and you get to learn more about his past. And then also in 14 BBY we have the video game Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. I won't be discussing it in full detail, but that is also taking place the same year as Lords of the Sith and Tarkin. 1 year later, in 13 BBY, is when Lyra Erso was killed in the beginning of Rogue One. So Jyn Erso is saved by Saw Gerrera, and Galen is taken by Krennic to go work on the Death Star. Now, I don't have it here next to this 13 BBY slot. I have it all the way towards Rogue One. It's the book called Rebel Rising, written by Beth Revis. And along with the beginning of Rebel Rising, taking place in 13 BBY, we have the story Most Wanted. That is also a young adult novel written by Ray Carson about Han Solo and Kira on the planet Corellia a little bit before the beginning of Solo. And I find it very funny how the beginnings, the two prologues for Solo and Rogue One, both take place in the same year. Then we have Han Solo Imperial Cadet. This is a 5-issue miniseries starring our favorite smuggler while he was in the Empire a little bit after the prologue of Solo. We don't really have a specific year for it, I just put it in 12 BBY. And then also an additional tidbit, this is when Fortress Vader is completed, also in this year. And that was confirmed in a recent visual dictionary, and that is also part of the Darth Vader 2017 comic that I covered last video. Moving on to the next year is 11 BBY. This is the year where the Obi-Wan Kenobi show will take place. Whenever that is coming out, we don't know, but they announced that it takes place 8 years after Revenge of the Sith. 19 minus 11 is 8 years, putting it in 11 BBY, along with A New Dawn. And A New Dawn, a book written by John Jackson Miller, was actually, I believe, the first canon novel introduced. It stars Hera Syndulla and Kanan Jarrus, and it tells you the story of how they met before we see them in Star Wars Rebels. Next, right before Solo: A Star Wars Story, we have Lando Double or Nothing. It is a 5-issue miniseries about Lando and L3 with the Millennium Falcon, and then we also get a one-shot with Beckett. And then moving on, we don't really have a specific time slot for these comics. Tales from Vader's Castle and Return to Vader's Castle, those are both Star Wars Adventures comics, which I said I wouldn't really cover them last video, and I'm not really covering the adventures, but this is kind of like a special, so I kind of just put them there. They're stories, more like horror stories told about Vader's Castle, and it takes place during the reign of the Empire. Moving all the way up to 5 BBY is the beginning of the show The Star Wars Rebels, and that's where we find our heroes and they meet Ezra Bridger. And I won't cover Star Wars Rebels in this video. I just will say that it does span 5 BBY to 1 BBY, so around like 5 years. It ends a little bit before Rogue One, so maybe a year before Rogue One. So that's when that show takes place. And then we have Thrawn. Thrawn is the first novel written by Timothy Zahn in the canon. And again, we're not really sure when it starts out, but it ends right before season 3 of Rebels. So I kind of just put it in that timeline. The comic, they actually made a comic. It's an adaptation for it. And it shows in the beginning clone troopers. So I'm assuming it starts maybe right after Order 66, around that time period. And then you see how Thrawn grows within the Empire. And you finally get to right before his appearance in Star Wars Rebels. And then moving on to 3 BBY, we have a lot of stuff going on. The Cassian Andor series that is also coming to Disney Plus, that is supposed to take place in this year with Cassian and K2SO. And there's also a comic that they did give us a few years back. It's called Cassian and K2SO, and it is a one-shot comic of how they met. Now, whether or not they're going to retcon this comic and then just show us how they met in the series, or maybe they'll show the comics events in the series, I'm not too sure. I'm thinking it's possible they might retcon it. Personally, I wouldn't really care. It's not one of the best one-shots ever, so that might or might not happen. Also in 3 BBY, we have Leia, Princess of Alderaan, a young adult novel written by Claudia Gray. I personally love her as a Star Wars author, and I do like this book. It's Leia when she's 16, and she becomes the princess for the Alderaan, and that's when she also joins the rebellion. Then in 2 BBY, we have Thrawn Alliances. Now, Thrawn Alliances takes place just after the Season 3 Star Wars Rebels finale, and I really love this book. I think Zahn writes Anakin perfectly, he writes Vader perfectly, and of course he writes Thrawn perfectly because he created Thrawn. And there's 2 stories that are going on. One story in this timeline, and then another story flashing back to the Clone Wars, where Anakin and Thrawn actually met. And it's really funny, the banter between Anakin and Thrawn, and then the banter between Vader and Thrawn, and how Anakin is so different now. And throughout the book, you're getting, Thrawn is kind of piecing it together, like I may know this man, and I really love the book. I think it's my number 1 canon novel, and that's saying something. Probably right under Lords of the Sith. I mean, Vader is my favorite Star Wars character, and Anakin. I might even like Anakin a little bit more than Vader. I know that may not make sense, but Lords of the Sith is a huge Vader story flashing back to his past, and so is Thrawn Alliances, and that's probably why those 2 are my top 2 books, because if you're a fan of Vader, these 2 books just nail it out of the park. And then Thrawn Treason is the 3rd novel in Zahn's trilogy, and it takes place around the middle of Star Wars Rebels Season 4. So to understand some of the things that they mention in the Thrawn books, you would have to have watched Star Wars Rebels, but it doesn't really take away from the actual books. They just mention these things, and you wouldn't know what that was if you didn't see Rebels. But I personally love the connections, and Zahn worked probably very closely with Filoni, because Filoni worked close with Zahn in bringing Thrawn to Rebels, and I think they did it very wonderfully, and it ends right before Thrawn comes back in the end of Season 4 of Rebels. Getting closer and closer to Rogue One. A little bit before that, we don't really know when this takes place, but it's an intro short story, Guardians of the Wills. It's about Baze Malbus and Chirrut Imwe, and they're on Jeddah, and Saw is also on Jeddah, and it's just how they interact, and they're doing a little mission. I think I quite like this one. It's just a short story, but if you're fans of the characters, you get more content with this one. And then also around that same time frame are the 2 VR video games. Secrets of the Empire is actually a void experience where you go to a building and you're actually on Mustafar. You can like smell the lava, you can feel everything. And then Vader Immortal is a VR series that they came out recently, and that those two games tie in, and Vader Immortal takes place after Secrets of the Empire. And then finally, we have Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and that takes place obviously right before A New Hope. So the next video will be about the original trilogy movies and all the comics and novels surrounding that era. It's probably the most packed slide I have. There is so much content in that era, all with the Star Wars comics, the Vader comics. There's Luke, Leia, Han, Lando, Chewie comics. It's pretty insane. So that'll be dedicated probably maybe to its own video, just like this one. And that's probably going to do it for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the channel. Let me know what you think in the comments. And I'll see you next video, Rise of the Rebellion. May the Force be with you all, and I hope you all have a good one.